Welcome everybody. Today's topic is comprehensive safety planning with Project Safeguard in the Colorado Address Confidentiality Program. We are really excited to be offering this webinar. It's a first for us, and we are really happy to have Shae from Project Safeguard here, one of our community partners, to help talk about safety planning. But before we get into it, we'll just do brief introductions. My name, like Maria said, is Nikki Hernandez. I have been with the Address Confidentiality Program for a little over 2.5 years. I was previously the new participant liaison, so I was processing all those new applications and got a lot of experience with the different processes that we have with our participants. And then previous to being with the ACP, I was also working in a dual advocacy shelter. So I also have a little bit of victim advocacy service experience that you all are doing. Looks like most of you all are in community-based organizations.
Yeah, and as Nikki said, my name is Shae Davis. I'm a legal advocate with Project Safeguard. I've been with Project Safeguard for almost a year now, yeah. Before I came to Project Safeguard, I actually worked as an advocate with Gateway Domestic Violence Services within their court advocacy program. Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay. So we'll start with just sharing our agenda, what the plan is, goals for this webinar. The first piece is going to be presented by Shae, and it's going to discuss some basic approaches to safety planning with, of course, some experiences and stories that she's incorporating with that. So hopefully you'll get some resources and knowledge out of that. We're hoping that everyone that's attending is really interactive and responsive to the questions. We want it to really be a community sharing event. So all of you have a lot of knowledge and experience within your own agencies, and we welcome you to bring that to this space and share it related to safety planning or anything else that you want to just share. So we'll start with that safety planning with Project Safeguard. We'll then go into some specific safety tools and facets of the Address Confidentiality Program for any participants that you are working with or future participants that you just want to have that knowledge of. And then the last piece is going to be talking about some options for survivors if their information is compromised. So we'll go over some different options there, and then we'll just follow up with a Q&A session. But feel free to put any questions you have in the chat box at any point, and we will make sure to address those as they come up.
All right, so I guess we'll just go ahead and dive right in and explain what a safety plan is. So a safety plan is a personalized, practical plan that can help survivors avoid dangerous situations and have better ways to react when danger escalates. Although they can't control their abuser's use of violence, they can plan how to respond to it during those situations to help keep themselves safe. They can also they have the best insight. They know the person that they're dealing with better than anyone else. So I think that having that information aligned with the safety plan helps their situation out even more. All right, and effective safety planning. So I think it's important to remember that the victim, the survivor, is their own expert, and every safety plan is unique. Safety plans for survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, and stalking, all of these things, they're kind of similar in certain regards. They focused at looking at options, developing strategies, and assessing formal and informal resources. Safety planning should be dynamic for each individual, evolving with that person's changing circumstances. To help develop an effective safety plan, there are certain differences that should also be considered depending on the kind of violence that the survivor has been or is experiencing. So assess the situation, kind of try to make it specific. Listed here are just 4 of the many types of victimizations, along with some considerations that can be helpful during safety planning with clients. I find this chart to be helpful when working with a client that has multiple victimizations. You know, again, safety planning with every client will be unique. It'll be different. So these things may not even apply to a person in a situation dealing with domestic violence. They may need to focus on safety planning in the sexual assault category. Those things might work better for their situation. So I think that it's always important to kind of make sure you're assessing everything that's going on within the situation, because it's not always going to be the same. While safety planning, I think it's important to identify a number of things. First, identifying the risks. Because the survivor is the expert of their life, they have the best sense of how dangerous their situation is. I think a good way to address these concerns or these risks might be to ask, are you safe at home? Where are you unsafe? And who are you unsafe with? You guys may have other questions that you ask, and go ahead and pop those in the chat box if you have some questions that may be helpful to everyone else. That's great. I next then like to identify who will be involved with or affected by the safety plan. For example, the children, other family members that they may be taking care of, or depending on the circumstances, like stalking, for instance, that person or that survivor may have a spouse, and their spouse might be affected by their safety plan as well. Next, I like to identify what the victim wants. They may want to leave the situation or stay. They may want to relocate, or they may just want a lock change. Every situation is unique, and I think that that survivor should be the person that's responsible for kind of setting that goal and what they expect to attain from safety planning. Next, identify resources that may be helpful in collaboration with their individualized safety plan. Protection order may be helpful for them. They may be a good candidate for the address confidentiality program. Counseling may be a good option. There may be shelter options because their situation is unsafe at home. For some people, pre-packing is a very good option to have, you know, a few resources available for them from their home: clothing, toothbrush, things like that, so that they're able to get out of the home pretty quickly. Support systems. I think it's important for survivors to identify their support systems so that they know who they can come to, you know, when they're in danger. And also break the lease letters. We are also, as application assistants, able to provide break the lease letters for our clients, and we'll go into more detail about what break the lease letters contain shortly. So when I'm finalizing a safety plan with a client, I like to ask myself these questions. Did you get a clear idea of what the survivor wants to achieve? Did you identify risks and steps to help keep them safe? Did you identify supports and resources suitable for their individual situation? Did you identify procedural methods that can help minimize safety risks? I like to think of this as like a mental check, a way to kind of check yourself before you have finalized everything, just to kind of make sure that as the advocate, you're providing everything that you can for that survivor. Are there questions that you guys ask yourselves that might be helpful? If so, go ahead and pop those in the chat box. We'd love to hear from you guys about that. So next, I'm going to go ahead and pull up an example safety plan. This is a safety plan that we use, that we use with Project Safeguard. And again, it's just an example, and this is also listed in the handouts. It is listed as PSG Updated Safety Plan. So this, you have access to this as well. And we're also working on revamping this. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get that in before this presentation, but that's okay. If anyone wants access to that, you guys are more than welcome to send me an email and I can send you out our updated version. But as I said, so this is a safety plan that we like to use when working with clients at Project Safeguard. It has 5 different categories, and I think all of these categories kind of help the survivor identify certain safety ideas within their situation that may be helpful for them. So with the first category, safety during a violent incident. From this category, one of the main ones that I use is second line down, I can keep my purse and keys ready and keep them where I can get them quickly. The survivors that I work with that utilize this safety idea, an example of what they may do is make copies of their car keys or the keys to their home, things like that. They may have a safe and they may make copies of the keys to their safe. Things like that to keep certain items safe, like birth certificates, social security cards, all the important information that they may need once they are ready to leave their situation. Staying safe at work and or school. Again, these safety ideas center around safety at work and school. So kind of trying to split up and give the survivor a better idea of things that they can do when they're at different locations, things like that. And a good example, I think, from this page that I use most commonly is the safest ways to leave my building in an emergency situation are. A lot of the times we don't realize this, and I don't know if you're one of those people that takes the same route to work every morning. When you find yourself in a situation to where you have to safety plan, some of those things might not be so safe anymore. Maybe finding alternate routes to work, to school. Maybe you don't drive every day. Maybe you take the bus, for example, certain days out of the week, or the train. Just kind of shifting around the ways that you leave your building and things like that. For survivors, this can be really helpful. And I think it also puts them into perspective. Sorry, I'm tongue-tied. It puts them into perspective of certain things that they may not realize at first. I think some of these safety ideas are of course, we would think about it as common sense, but I think that when you're going through a crisis, it's sometimes hard to think about ways to help keep yourself safe. The next category is labeled as technology, online, privacy, and safety. And I think we skipped one, so that's okay. Okay. And I'm sorry about that. One of the safety ideas that I love to use from this page would have to be, I can ask my friends to not tag me in photos online and let me know if they see strange postings or information connected with my name and accounts online. Almost everyone that I know is on social media. That may be different for some people, but I think that it is important to look at those settings, those privacy settings, when going through Facebook or Snapchat or Instagram, whatever platform that you use. Even though you may be public, the people that you tag in your photos, things like that, may want their information to remain private. And once that's shared through a party that has their page set as public, it's public. And it's public to the world. And that might be something that survivors may see within the safety plan and say, hey, that's me and I fit in that category. And maybe this is something that I need to tell my friends. So just again, kind of making sure that the survivor is keeping in mind things that can help keep them safe. Staying safe emotionally. Because being in an abusive situation can be emotionally exhausting, as our safety plan says. I also think that this is a really, really important page within the safety plan because emotional health is so important, and I think self-care it helps keep us going. One of the safety ideas that I love to use from this page is all the way at the bottom, and it says, if I need to continue contact with the abuser, I can contact blank before or after to get support. And it lists a few examples underneath that safety idea. Helpline advocate, a friend, a roommate, a counselor, or etc. So I think this safety idea kind of helps the survivor put into perspective those people. They can even jot their information down in the important names and locations box next to that safety idea. A list of names and telephone numbers that may be people that they can contact when they need support, or when they realize that they're in a situation where it's dangerous, people that they can call. So I think it's also important to make note that because the survivor is putting so much information within this safety plan, it's important to kind of make sure that the safety plan stays in a safe location also. And safety when preparing to leave. sometimes the situations can become even more volatile and dangerous when preparing to leave. So these safety ideas center around that ideal. And one of these safety ideas that I utilize a lot from this page would be, I can start noting my abuser's habits to pick the best times to leave. And next to that, it says best days and times. So I think that with this example, this helps the survivor kind of stay on track and gives them the ability to plan ahead if they are planning to leave, and maybe they are planning to leave but they're not leaving for a month. Kind of figuring out what the abuser's habits are, days and times that they're at work, just kind of getting a grasp on what that schedule is going to look like can help them leave the situation a little bit more safely. And last but not least, my favorite page, well, not my favorite, but one of them. I like to think of this as 50 inexpensive ways to take a break. And I think this is helpful for us all. Working in this realm, we need to remember self-care is important. And then we also need to make sure that our survivors remember self-care is important. And they may not all have the means to go out and have fancy dinners. So I thought this is actually a great way to end this safety plan, 50 ways to take a break. So whosever idea that was at Project Safeguard, I really appreciate the fact that you brought all that to all of our attention, definitely.
All right. Thank you, Shae, for sharing all that information. I recognize a lot of the names of attendees as application assistants, so I appreciate that you guys are interested and willing to sit in with us for another hour and a half to learn some more. Obviously, the safety planning topics that Shae just went over would apply to you all as victim advocates, but also as application assistants. You guys fill a dual role, and so we'll go into what you can help a participant in the address confidentiality program in terms of enhancing their confidentiality while they're in the program. And the way that we'll talk about this is just highlighting some basics. This is information you're probably aware of, but we will just reiterate. It's always good to reiterate to participants. They don't always keep this in mind when they're utilizing their substitute address. And then we'll go into more detailed parts of the program related to receiving mail, interacting with state and local government agencies, as well as private businesses, and what facets of our program are most helpful for people to utilize and available for participants to utilize in order to get the most out of the program. So the things that we tell our participants up front are listed here: basics of confidentiality. So updating all of their existing records with their substitute address is going to be a really important piece to maximizing their confidentiality. And we do have it is required that any state or local government agency that gets a request from a participant to redact information within 90 days of prior to them being certified, they are required to redact that information for them. So that's going to include police reports, court cases, any other kind of maybe human services documents. All of those are going to be eligible to be changed and updated to the substitute address, but the participant has to make that request. And so it's an important part that if our participants are not utilizing that, then all that pre-existing information is still going to be available out there. So that's an important piece. Using the substitute address whenever they are asked for their address information is another really straightforward thing that they can do. So it is a participant's legal home, work, and school address to use whenever anybody asks for it. So it does get a little bit tricky with home-based services, and we will address that a little bit later. But otherwise, they can be using their substitute address anytime it's being asked for, anytime their actual address is being asked for. Participants should be intentional and cautious as well when providing their actual address. So There are very few cases that they are going to be required to provide their actual address in order to receive services from state and local government agencies. Those are outlined in their participant handbook, but otherwise it's a good rule for them to be providing their substitute address rather than their actual address anytime that they're trying to get services. And then if they have any questions or they're ever unsure whether they're supposed to be providing their actual address or their substitute address, they can always call us. And they should only be providing their address if they actually need to. So there are forms and times when it's optional to provide address information. If it's optional, then they shouldn't be providing it because that's just extra information that they're making possibly available for other people to find. So those are just some basic overall approaches to utilizing the program that you can share with participants or work with them on if you are interacting with them still and doing advocacy with them. And we'll move on to mail forwarding. So when someone gets enrolled in our program, they are provided with that substitute address that they can use for receiving mail and for all their public records. A lot of people do think that they are still required to do a change of address with the United States Postal Service in order to receive their mail through us, and that's not true. So this is one big way that participants could potentially compromise their confidentiality is if they do a change of address through USPS. Like I said, they're not required to do that. And the reason that it could compromise their confidentiality is because there is a national database of changes of address that different companies, people, entities subscribe to. And when there is a new change of address submitted for one of their customers, they would be able to access that information, and it could ultimately become public information. So again, they're not required to do a change of address. We don't request them to do that. It's actually better if they don't do any kind of change with USPS at all. We become their mail agents, more or less. So we become USPS for them when they get enrolled in our program. So once they do have a new address, then they need to notify us. They don't need to notify USPS. If a participant is insistent about doing something with USPS, the only thing that our program would recommend is a mail forwarding from an old address to the substitute address. This is going to be a temporary forwarding order, and it's not going to go into any national database. So it doesn't reflect their current address that they're trying to protect. It would simply be for any existing mail that is still going to an old address. So again, if they want to do something with USPS, it should just be a mail forwarding from an old address to the substitute address. All right, another option for participants to increase their level of safety while they're in our program is going to be using a different mailing address for receiving mail that is forwarded by our program. So what that could look like is a friend or family member's house. It could be a PO box. If they use a PO box as a mailing address, then they can actually use their substitute address to set up that PO box. So they wouldn't have to provide their actual address just to get a PO box. So they can use their substitute address for that. And that way, what using a different mailing address helps achieve is if that information, that mailing address is compromised, it's not going to directly lead to them being found. So PO box, if someone shows up there, obviously not going to find a participant. If it's a family or friend's house, it's just a little bit safer rather than being their actual address. And then the last piece related to mail forwarding that is available to our participants is going to be using a safe label name. So a safe label name is not a legal name change. It's not a name that should be listed on any incoming mail. It is strictly for the purpose of mail leaving our ACP office and being forwarded to an actual address of a participant. So that can be a little bit confusing, but the main thing there is that using a different name on their mailing label is going to prevent any kind of issues related to somebody maybe seeing that piece of mail from the time it leaves our office to the time it arrives at that participant's actual address. So if maybe an offender is working with USPS and has access to mail, then they might see the actual address and an actual name of a participant. But if they're utilizing a safe label name, then they're not calling as much attention to themselves. Same thing for if someone is tampering with someone's mail in a mailbox. They're grabbing mail out of someone's mailbox to see who lives there. Then if they do get that, and it's going to be a different name than their legal name. All right, and we do have a form for that for participants to fill out, because we do need to know what that safe label name is that they want to be using, so that we can put it on the mailing labels. It'll look like this when we forward it out. The safe label name, we just request that it is not an obviously fake name, such as a cartoon character or a famous person, a real person. A good way to try to figure out a safe label name is picking the first name of a childhood friend and the last name of a friend from adulthood. So I see we have a question here. So the question is, what are suggested safe label names? I sometimes struggle with what to tell people to use, but frequently use a first initial and last name if a common last name, or they choose a child's first name, but how far/different can it be from their actual name? So it can be, yeah, that's a great question. It can be completely different than their legal name. It's actually beneficial if it's a completely different name. So another tip besides mixing up names of friends is also to consider using the name of a different gender identity. So if you have a female sounding name, then you can choose a name that is maybe more commonly used for males. Does that answer your question, Stacy? Again, it's just not wanting to use things that's going to call attention to that piece of mail. So we sometimes get like Jane Doe's on there. That is very obviously fake. We want to avoid that as well. So you can play with figuring out how to mix it up with that, as long as it's not a famous person. All right, moving on to state and local government agencies. So in our general presentation, we did talk a little bit in more detail about all of the different agencies that are really common for our participants to interact with and what those processes look like. And here I want to focus more on some of the less obvious benefits of being in our program in terms of what kind of services we can provide. So we'll talk about schools, voter registration, and then participants requesting additional types of confidentiality. We got another question. Before I get into that, I'll answer this question. How can ACP be used for 1, county DHS benefit applications, 2, court filings and court others in a county other than Denver? How can a client file a TPO or custody case in our county and still make the abuser think they're in Denver? Perfect. Okay. So thank you for those questions. I will, so for DHS benefits, so county-based services, we do provide participants with a county residency letter, and that they would take either in person to apply for benefits. They would show their county residency letter and from there be able to access services. So they don't have to hand it over. There shouldn't be a copy made of it because it does reflect their actual address, or their actual county, not their actual address, their actual county, which is considered protected information. So we provide that directly to the participant to share for the purpose of accessing county-based services in their correct county rather than the county associated with the substitute address, which is Adams County. So they do have to go to their correct county for that, for county-based services. For court filings, they can also use their substitute address as their mailing address, as their address of residence. They would just use, they would either, if they have existing cases, then they can go to the court and update that address information by showing their authorization card. So we provide each participant in the program an authorization card to be able to verify that they are eligible to use the substitute address. And so they would need to show that whenever they're making a request to use their substitute address. So that includes with courts. They can file either in the county of the substitute address or to, so to the county of the substitute address or in the county that they actually reside in. That is their choice. So they can file in either. For a protection order, they can use their substitute address. They just might want to consider the pros and cons of that. So that might require some additional advice seeking. And then it looks like Maria shared our general webinar, so that if you want to go back to that and refer to it, you're welcome to watch it there. Did I answer your question, Nancy?
And just to kind of add to what you said, Nikki, that last question about the temporary protection orders, survivors are also able to omit their address completely from temporary protection orders. So if in a situation like that, they can completely omit it from all of their paperwork pertaining to that protection order.
Beautiful. All right. Well, we're going to move on. If you need clarification, Nancy, we can touch base maybe a little later or afterwards. We'll move on to what we're talking about with those enhanced services with state and local government agencies. So for schools, we do offer a few different things to help make the process smoother for people who have children in school or who are in school themselves and want to keep that information as protected as possible. One of the things that we can do if children are getting enrolled into a new school, then we can verify district eligibility without disclosing their actual address. The way that works is that there's a form in their welcome packet that we provide all new households with that they can fill out or they can provide to the district for them to fill out and send it directly to us. From there, we can let that district either know that yes or no, that participant or those children are eligible to be enrolled in that district. And at that point, the district is responsible for enrolling those children. We can also facilitate the transfer of school records. And what that helps do is prevent a previous school from knowing where those records are being sent to. So if an offender is a former spouse or has access to those school records, they're not going to be able to track where those school records went to and what the new school those children are enrolled in is. All right, so voter registration. Voter registration is a really big way that information is made public. So voter registration records are readily available through the Secretary of State's office, and you can do that online if you know the right information about the person you're looking for. And so as participants, we allow people to become ACP voters if they complete the ACP voter form. And this provides them with the highest level of confidentiality in the state for being a voter. So what that means is it's going to remove their information from the Secretary of State's website, as well as any paper documents that are being requested. So there are people who will go to the Secretary of State's office and make requests for a paper list of all of the voters in the state, and that way they can put that information onto a third-party website and then start charging people for access to that information. That's a big way that you can Google yourself and find all of your information. And so this is a really important part of the program that is underutilized currently for our participants to be able to try to keep their information as confidential as possible. So the ballots that we receive for participants who are utilizing the ACP Voter process are actually going to be coming in an authorization number, which is just an identifying number that we have for tying people to the program. So it's not actually coming even in their names when we receive it and then forward it on to their confidential address. And the form that they would want to use is going to be in their welcome packet, just so you can get an idea of what that looks like. It goes directly to the county that they reside in, and it doesn't come back to us. But from there, there are 2 ACP election staff members who manage ACP voters, who enroll them, who will process any changes so that they're always getting the correct ballot. That's just the bottom half of that form. It's a long form. Really quickly, I'll go back to the protection. So this last piece about additional requests, so our participants are also able to submit written requests if they want additional information to be made confidential. So that could include an email address or photographs of their house or any other kind of information that could lead to them being found. So they are able to make those written requests under our ACP laws, and that's maybe not something that they're always aware of, but telephone numbers even could potentially fall into that category of information that would have to be removed from the internet so that they couldn't be located through that. All right. So we'll move on to just this little tidbit about interacting with federal agencies. And so federal agencies are not required to accept the substitute address because ACP laws are state laws, but participants' substitute address, a participant's substitute address is their legal home, work, and school address, so they can use it, like I said, for whenever they are being asked for that address information. That includes immigration paperwork, filing for their taxes, or getting their passport. So just another way to keep their actual address out of any kind of public information. All right, and then the last group here that we'll talk about is private businesses. Private businesses in the state of Colorado are not required to accept the substitute address. And so this is where it gets a little bit trickier. With grocery stores, fixing your car, even getting set up for bank accounts, it's pretty straightforward using the substitute address because here in Colorado, we use an address that looks like a real address. It's not a PO box or anything of that sort that complicates things. It's easy enough to just provide it, and most of the time with private businesses, there's not too many issues. Where it does get messy is with home-based services. So with home-based services like utilities, television, and internet, people need to know where they're setting up those services. And so what we have in terms of a solution for that is utilizing business agreements with some companies, mostly along the Front Range, that serve the Front Range, that are willing to provide an alias name or allow the use of an alias name by our participants to associate with an actual address. And that way, if that information is ever compromised, it's not going to connect a participant's actual name with their actual address. So we have those business agreements only with a few different companies. We have Comcast, Xcel Energy, CenturyLink, but for the companies that are not, that do not have business agreements with us, it does require a little bit more self-advocacy by our participants. And so we do have some suggestions for interacting with private companies for our participants if there's not a business agreement already in place. And what they're going to be is requesting protection such as using your initials on your account, using your substitute address as a mailing address. You could also request to use an alias name if that company is willing to do that. We've definitely had participants who have made those kinds of requests and have had them honored. It probably takes some good communication skills and probably follow up with us if those companies have questions about what we do. They can always call our main office and we're happy to just explain that general information. And then the last point here is related to real property. And you do have a handout. This handout, if you're an application assistant, you probably already have it, but it is a good resource if you do end up having a client or someone you're working with who is purchasing a home, then there's information related to what kind of protections they get. It is limited though, so it's important to read through that to really understand, and then of course you can call us with questions. But I won't spend too much time on that for the purpose of this webinar. Okay, so we're going to move on to what if a participant's information is compromised?
Thanks, Nikki. I think I learned a few things. So what are a survivor's option? For me, when I've worked with clients who were compromised, the most common option chosen was breaking the lease. So a client can terminate their lease agreement early if they want to vacate their home because they're afraid that their self or their children face immediate danger as a result of victimization. And so one of the first things, you'll actually need one of these documents, but first, before you provide your homeowner, landlord, realty company with those documents, you have to first contact them in writing and let them know that you are indeed a victim or a survivor of domestic violence or domestic abuse. And then after that, you will have to provide that same person with one of the following documents. So either a police report written within the last 60 days, a valid protection order, or in a case of these victimizations that we usually work with, a written statement from an application assistant or a medical professional who basically confirms that they have been working with you, things like that. They know that you're indeed a survivor. And I think one thing to also keep in mind if you're working with someone who is going to be breaking their lease or thinking about breaking their lease is to keep in mind that they may be responsible for 1 month's rent for the following month after they leave the residence. So for example, if they move out in January, they will still be responsible for February's rent. And I think that gets kind of tricky to people. If you are an advocate or if you're working with someone who has particular questions pertaining to breaking the lease, I think good resources for them might be RMVLC, sending them over to us at Project Safeguard. Also, Colorado Legal Services is a good resource to utilize and kind of have a consultation and chat with someone that can provide them legal advice on their situation.
So I'll just pause here really quick for this question from Stacy. So Stacy says, I've heard that one way to buy real property and have your information protected is to set up a trust that you manage, then buy the property with the trust. What are your thoughts on this process? So we have certainly had that situation with some of our participants, and honestly, if it works for them and they're not using a trust that is easily connected to them, name-wise, then that might be a really good option for them, because our real property process is still, like I said, fairly limited. Really what they can expect to get out of that if they are a participant about to purchase a home is that they can request that their information is not placed on the county website. They do have to make that request in writing to the county clerk and assessor. And it's best to do it if they have, or if they're about to purchase the home or haven't purchased it yet. If they've already purchased it, then it's also going to be really limited whether they can, or what kind of impact redacting that information is going to have. So I would say that if that's something that they're willing and able to do, that's a good solution for trying to keep their information protected. Perfect. All right, sorry,
Yeah,
Shae.
no, it's no problem at all. Great question, Stacy. And if anyone has any questions pertaining to how to break the lease, wanting to know other things that you may be able to use, anything relating to breaking the lease, definitely feel free to pop into the chat box. We also have a handout, and it's listed as Lease Termination Process Law, that kind of gives you more information on the statute that is applied when using this method. And so I guess to backtrack a little bit on why a client, we're going to talk a little bit more about why a client would be responsible for that following month's rent. And it gets really tricky. So the law states that the tenant is responsible for that month's worth of rent if the landlord has experienced and documented damages. And so I think that if factor always is different in each situation. There are homeowners that will work with the survivor because they are aware of their situation and their circumstances, and they're willing to work with them because they're aware of the statute. Some of the times they're not aware of the statute. And so I always mention to the survivors that I work with that when notifying that landlord about your circumstances, because that is actually one of the requirements of breaking the lease, you have to first notify them in writing that you are indeed a victim. So after notifying them of that, I usually attach the statute, which, like I said, again, is a handout, to that notification so that that landlord is actually aware of the statute and how it applies in the situation and all of that. So the homeowner can also keep a security deposit until they pay the next month's rent, and they can also use that security deposit to offset the amount that that survivor owes on that lease agreement. So it can get a little bit tricky. Like I said, the if factor definitely plays a role in there. I always tell the people that I work with, the clients that I work with, to first kind of chat with the landlord and kind of see where that person's head is, so to speak, and they may be willing to work with them within their situation. And things to know. So things to know when breaking the lease is that Colorado offers housing laws related to protecting survivors of abuse. And as I said, that is also one of the handouts, Lease Termination Process Law. And that is the actual statute. So if you do want to write that down and look it up or want that handy, that is the statute. And you can actually Google that and find the statute itself. Second, I think a good thing to know is that the landlord cannot terminate a survivor's lease, fine them, or penalize them for contacting police, the fire department, any emergency assistance response to their home. Does not terminate their lease agreement. And lastly, they cannot give up their right to call the police or any other emergency assistance. I have worked with people who have mentioned that this was an issue of theirs with their lease, as an issue with their landlord. They were getting upset that they had to contact the police, and it's within their right to do so. So if you're working with a client that's also having the same issues, definitely refer them over again to CLS, RMLVC, or Project Safeguard.
Awesome. So breaking a lease and moving to a different location is going to be the most ideal response to your information being compromised as a participant in our program. The reason being is that you can do all the work to redact information, to try and pull it back in, but it might be pretty difficult or impossible to get all of that information removed from wherever it's already been publicly available. And even if it is removed, someone may have already seen it and shared it. So breaking that lease is going to be a really important resource for anyone whose information is compromised for whatever reason. So if they're not able to do that, then some other options that they have include trying to redact that information. So if they maybe accidentally provided their actual address when going to get their vehicle registered, then they can still go back, go in person, and request to use the substitute address. So I put up this part of the statute referring to any records being redacted that are created up to 90 days prior to them being enrolled in the program, but that is true for even if they accidentally or knowingly provide their actual address to some state or local government agency, they can still go back and request to use their substitute address. But again, the impact that that's going to have, who knows? It could have already been shared, it could have already been made public somehow. A good way to check that is Googling yourself. And that's really scary for anybody to do because there's so much information about all of us on the internet. If a participant does see their actual address on any kind of website, then one option that they have is contacting those website administrators and making requests that that information is removed. There is no requirement for those website administrators to actually remove the information, but they can make that request, and they just need to do a little digging to find out who the website administrator is and how to contact them. And then below here, I just have the image of the authorization card. So if you're not familiar with what that looks like, that is what a participant should have on them and should show if they're making a request to use their substitute address. And I did also want to just share these confidentiality resources. These are resources that we have shared with participants when their information has been compromised, just for not only trying to see what they can do with the information that's already available, but moving forward, how to better keep their information safe while online. So Safety Net Project talks about specifically privacy while using technology. We've got the World Privacy Forum, and they do a lot of research specific to consumer privacy issues. Confidentiality Institute has a lot of best practices, and then Stalking Resource Center has a ton of resources online related to identifying, tracking, stalking behaviors, and then how to resolve them if possible. All right, and then the last option that we'll talk about is contacting law enforcement. So who should someone contact if they think that their information has knowingly been shared? So it is punishable by a Class 1 misdemeanor for any person to knowingly and intentionally either obtain or disclose information related to an ACP participant. So that includes state and local government agencies that house that information, as well as just as well as other individuals. So if for some reason it is intentionally shared, an address or phone number or something that leads to a participant being found, then they can report to their local law enforcement. If the information has been shared by an attorney or a licensed professional like a therapist or a court-appointed official during those court proceedings, then they can also make grievances to the Attorney Regulation Council or to DORA, depending on who they believe made that that violation of their information. And then the last piece, I know Shae has spoken to, but if you want to just reiterate.
Yeah, definitely. If you find that you have working with a survivor and they're in one of these situations, definitely seek out legal assistance from any of the organizations that are local to you. But my go-tos would have to be Project Safeguard, Rocky Mountain Victim Law Center, and JAMLAC, the Justice and Mercy Legal Aid Clinic. And I definitely think that these are really good resources. They help provide consultations so that that survivor is able to speak to someone, to even just to talk to them about what their options could possibly be in their situation without kind of going through that full representation process. And I know that consultations can be really expensive. So all of these agencies listed actually have a program in place to help provide some of those services.
So I do, before we wrap up here, I know we're a little shorter than expected, but I know there may have been some interest in discussing the automatic voter registration bill that was passed, and so I will just speak to that briefly. We don't have a lot of information yet. We are going to be meeting with Secretary of State next week to kind of talk about more details about how it's going to be implemented. But in terms of the bill and the language itself, it says that for any person who is enrolled in the program, that their records and records associated with those kinds of participants are not going to be utilized for automatic voter registration purposes, or for any voter registration purposes. So that's going to include with the Department of Revenue, if they're doing a registration or renewal, that should not apply to our participants, and that's the same for applying for Medicaid, should not result in our participants receiving automatic voter registration opt-out form that they need to do. But what that's going to look like specifically, again, we're going to be working on that. So if you are an application assistant currently, you can expect to get an update, if we get any update from our meeting next week, in our upcoming newsletter. So we'll send out our second quarterly e-newsletter to our application assistants and make sure to include any updates in there related to that automatic voter registration process. All right. So are there any lingering questions? You guys had great questions throughout. We definitely have time if you have more topics or things that we didn't touch on that you want us to cover, we can do that. I'll leave the screen on our contact information. So that is the contact information for myself as well as Shae and the agencies that we work with, so ACP and Project Safeguard.
And as I said, again, if anyone wants an updated version of our safety plan that we use at Project Safeguard, definitely reach out to me via email. I'm more than willing to send that out to everyone. It can be a helpful resource for us all.
So Nikki, you mentioned that the update for the automatic voter registration will be going to the application assistants, but if folks who are on the line, who are on the webinar aren't application assistants, where might they be able to find an update or more information as that comes up?
That's a great question. I mean, we can certainly share it with CCASA for you all to distribute. Maybe the little excerpt that we put into the newsletter for application assistance, we can share for you all to put in your membership newsletter. Or people can just call us, you know, after next week, they can just call me directly, they can call our office, and we can let them know what we know. You know, that's not the easiest process, but I see a question about getting a certificate for the webinar. I will let Maria answer that one.
Great, yeah. Oh, I am hearing an echo of myself. Yeah, so that sounds great, Nikki. Please do send us any updates, and we'll send that out to folks as well. We'll probably add it to our e-digest when you all send us that information. So that would be wonderful. And then as far as for certificates for the webinar, we unfortunately don't give certificates for attending webinars, but if you have a specific request, just let me know, and then we can see if we can work something out.
Perfect. Any other last minute questions?
Great. So as people are thinking about other questions or typing those in, Nikki and Shae, are there any final thoughts that you'd like to leave with folks as we're wrapping up the webinar?
Yeah, I think when I was kind of going over the requirements for breaking a lease, I think I forgot to touch on the fact that you are not required to be an ACP participant to complete that process. So what I mean is you don't have to be certified in the ACP program in order to complete a breaking the lease process legally. So I thought that was just something I'd throw in there and make sure that everyone here can kind of keep that in mind, that that's something that is available for anyone.
And then in the lease termination process handout that we provided, it does have an example of what you might write in that kind of letter. Shae obviously would be a good resource if you are going to be writing a break the lease letter, but there is that as well, and it does have the statute on the back side of that handout for you to refer to. And then I think just for me, you know, there are a lot of things that our staff, our ACP staff, know about, you know, in terms of our program and how to help someone increase their level of safety. And we could probably spend hours and hours talking about all those things, but the goal here was really to just give you, you know, a bit of an overview so that you can talk to participants about those options or remind them, and then if they need follow-up, we're always happy to provide that. But we don't expect you all to know all the ins and outs, certainly, about the program, because there's a lot and it's constantly changing. So instead, trying to just arm you with enough information to be reminded if a situation comes up that someone wants to buy a house, that you know that there's something in place for that, or if they are worried about their mail getting tampered with, that they can use a safe label name. So just knowing that there are options and other parts of our program that can help.
Awesome, great. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. It was wonderful information. Wonderful information to have, and I'm sure everyone who joined us today agrees. Very important, so I just want to thank you both for spending your afternoon with us. For everyone else, any questions that come up that that come up after the webinar that you didn't get the opportunity to ask our presenters, feel free to email me, and I can get the question to them, but also feel free to reach out to them with any of those questions. Look out for that follow-up email that I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar. I will be sending that out here very shortly. And that will have a copy of the presentation as well as those handouts in case you didn't get the opportunity to download those while we were on the webinar. We do have an upcoming webinar on August 21st at noon. It'll be presented by Anthony Antuna, who is with Colorado Vine. He will be doing a webinar on how advocates and law enforcement can best work together. So keep an eye out for registration information for that. We're also working on doing a Know Your Rights webinar. We don't have those dates finalized, but we're hoping to do that either early next month or early September. So keep an eye out for that as well, and we hope to have you at that. Please do fill out the survey that's going to be coming in the email. Again, those are very important to us. It helps us get to know what your needs are. So please do that on our SurveyMonkey link. And thank you all for attending the webinar. We hope to see you at another one soon. Thanks.